kick off this meeting. So good evening, everyone. Welcome. It is Tuesday, August 11th, and this is a regular meeting of the Eugene Planning Commission. Due to Governor Kate Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives executive order, this meeting is going to be held remotely using a virtual meeting technology. To get us started, we do have some public comment opportunity this evening. So the Planning Commission reserves 10 minutes at the beginning of this meeting for public comment. Public may comment on any matter except for items scheduled for a public hearing or public hearing items for which the record is already closed. And generally, we're going to limit the time to a few minutes, but I can use my discretion for that based on how many folks we have signed up. So with that, I will go ahead and open it up for public comment. If you do wish to speak, you can use the raise hand function, or you can just chat, just somehow let us know and we can call on you. I am looking to see, I have attendees and panelists, but I do not see anyone with their hand raised. Okay. Going once. All right, well, no public comment this evening, so we'll go ahead and move into our next agenda item. We're gonna be having a work session on the public involvement plan for the Middle Housing Code amendments, which is House Bill 2001. And I just wanna let folks know, again, I know you can all read your agenda, but we do have 2 items on the agenda today. And so I'll be working to manage time with those things. So, but I think we'll be fine. So I think with that, I'm going to kick it over to Terry and to walk us through that plan. Terry, where are you? Hold on, there you are.
Here.
Really quick, I do also want to mention, so obviously we're being asked to make not a recommendation on this plan, but to approve this plan. So I just want to be clear with everybody. This isn't something we're recommending to council. This is a plan that we are being asked to approve. So I'm sure Terry's going to tell us all about that. So go ahead, Terry. I'll stop now.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, commissioners. I think all of you were here, except for Dan, for the first presentation about the Middle Housing Code Amendments Public Involvement Plan. It was back in June, and I know that Dan went back and watched that meeting. So you had a first chance to review our project approach and our public involvement plan then. We took lots of great comments and feedback from you, revised our materials, and then took them to the City Council on July 22nd. And they had a great discussion. I would encourage you to watch that meeting if you haven't had a chance, because it'll give you an idea of what the councilors are thinking about with regards to this project. So that's available on the city's website. I do have a couple of slides, and I will show them, but they're very short because, as Tiffany was starting to say, what we're asking you to do today is take action to approve our public involvement plan. It's not the content of the project or the amendments themselves. It's our plan for reaching out to the community, and it details different strategies and groups that we will be bringing together to discuss all of the different aspects of the content. So that is the requested action, and I will share my screen with just a couple of slides for you. If I can find it. So this slide is just summarizing the changes that have been made to the plan since council, because as I mentioned, you all gave us quite a bit of feedback and we made some changes before it went to council. They had a good discussion, lots of questions, but ultimately just 2 suggested changes to the actual plan itself, and they're listed here. They suggested we add translation services, probably mostly Spanish language translation where feasible, and that was added to the plan on page 6. And there was discussion about making sure that we reach out to people, the general community, and consider the needs of those who don't have internet access or fast internet access or ability to interact that way. So we reemphasize that on page 11 in the plan. that it is our intent as we move through the public engagement activities to do what we can given different public health guidelines, such as taking paper surveys to grocery stores and things like that, or attending group meetings with social distancing or whatever we might need to do to be safe. So that change was made. And that brings us to where we are today with the requested action. We would, after your discussion, hope that you would do this in the form of a motion. So a round of discussion, any questions, things I can clarify for you. And then we would ask Tiffany to entertain a motion to approve the plan. And that provides staff the direction that we need to launch the public involvement. And we'll also be getting our design and code work at the same time. So that's really it. I'll stop sharing and entertain any questions and discussion that you have.
Okay, if there are any commissioners who would like to make any comments or, oh wait, I have it. Oh, Kristen. I see you on two places. So Commissioner Taylor, go ahead. Wait, you're muted. You might have to *6 on your phone.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. I'm trying. Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry about that. I am using two devices. One has visual and the other I can just see everything better. So sorry. Do you want, Terry, I just want to clarify, are you going to go through the document of attachment A in detail, or do you want just, is there organization to how you want feedback, Tiffany or staff, or Commissioner Edwards and staff?
I don't have a preference. I think what might work well is if you have particular questions in the document. I wasn't planning on walking through it. So if you have particular questions or places you can point us to in the document, that would be great.
Okay, perfect. I did have a question. I have several, so maybe I'll do a few, and then I'll continue the rest in round 2. So on page 1, I just want to point out, I think it was intentional, but I just want to make sure, is that the quoted sections are, yeah, it's all right. I clarified that already. So it's in the 3rd paragraph, last sentence. Updating our regulations to reduce barriers can allow our community to build new housing more quickly in more places and with less cost. It's a great summary. I'm just wondering if you want to add something about social equity or diversity in that kind of list. And maybe it's...
Help me with where you are. Are you in the AIS or attachment?
Sorry, attachment A, page 1.
Okay. And the last paragraph there?
The 3rd paragraph under overview.
Okay, gotcha.
It's just quickly, so basically you do a good job of summarizing elsewhere. Here you have places, so location, cost, which has to do with economics and making sure quickly it's an open process, but I'm just wondering if you want to add diversity. It's something in the list. It's a nitpick. Comment, not necessary, but just wanted you to
in more places and with less cost and diversity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now is the time to make changes. So I'm happy to make any changes that the commission feels as a group would add to the clarity of this document. So now's the time.
So that's one, and okay. I can open it up to comments. That's why I'm not sure some of my comments, if there's a certain way you want to go about this.
How many do you have?
Well, I have a few, and like I said, I can do a couple and then go to round 2.
Let's do it this way. Let's have you go through them, and then as folks, want to chime in on any of the suggestions that you're making, I think that would be helpful, and then they can elaborate on anything else. Right now, you're the only one who had their hand raised, so I'm
Okay.
guessing that this conversation might generate more questions and comments, but at this point, I don't see a reason to stop you from going through your feedback. And if I see hands pop up, perhaps, if somebody wants to make a comment relevant to what Commissioner Taylor is discussing, I'm happy to pause and try to accommodate for that.
Okay. So I can kind of talk more generally. What I noted is there's some just paying attention to social equity and diversity, and some of the ways it's talked about is either in that particular case, it's listing different categories without noting diversity, and then in a couple of other places you'll see where my questions lie. It's maybe a little awkward. So on page 2 of attachment A, it's the second piece. The project team is committed to a public engagement process that is, and if you go to inclusive, we will strive to communicate with all stakeholders, including underrepresented groups. All stakeholders, and then calling attention to underrepresented groups. I just paused there. So I'm not sure if there's a different way of actually representing diversity and inclusion without saying, okay, everybody's included. And by the way, we are going to include these underrepresented groups. All groups should be, right? The next one is specifically the very bottom, specifically the activities of the public involvement plan will include, once again, third bullet, engagement with representatives from boards, commission, and local partners, including neighborhood associations. There's no special allocation of different groups, but you call attention to neighborhood associations. So it's like, if you're going to include them, maybe there's a comprehensive list. Is this meant to be broad? Is it meant to be detailed? If it's meant to be detailed, why are we calling out these two groups in those two instances? So it's just just more of a question, maybe a little awkward. The other two other comments. One, page 6 is social media. It sounds like you have a consultant and good information, but just making sure social media isn't skewed towards certain population groups. For instance, Facebook has a user group that is a certain demographic, so making sure we're being inclusive in terms of what that social media is. The next one is page 7 under Equity Inclusivity. I'm just curious, I'm not sure it's necessary to say, and it's said a couple times, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I think Black, and it's just being careful of those terms. Other people of color anyways. So those are my general questions. There's one other thing I'm sure it's going to be presented different, but between page 9 and 10, I think that the list on 10 is actually part of the header under 8, which is project stakeholders, but there's a big gap when you print between 9 and 10. So I just wanted to call that attention to that.
Yeah, we've got a little formatting glitch there.
Yeah. Okay. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. I could respond to those, but I think what might be more efficient is if we see if other commissioners have things they want to discuss, and then we could come back and ask if folks agree with Kristen's proposed changes, because we can just make those or put a motion out to either make them or not.
Okay. I'm going to go to Commissioner Borofsky and then followed by Commissioner Ramey.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen, for doing such a good job of proofreading the document. That was more than I did. One of the questions that I had was the partnership that we're having with Healthy Democracy. I'm wondering if you could talk to how their model has changed with the new circumstances regarding the pandemic. You know, when we were presented with their model of how they do outreach, you know, it was getting the groups together and doing, you know, having people paid to come in and listen to it, and getting the names from the voters thing. And I'm just wondering, have they expressed to you how they plan to do their outreach? Because obviously it's changed from what was presented to us back earlier this spring. If you could talk to that, and then I may have a follow-up.
Sure. We've been in detailed conversations with Healthy Democracy and back and forth on kind of the right scope. In the beginning, we had a couple of different scenarios, sort of, if public health conditions allow, we'll hold some of these later ones in person. We have since shifted to completely online because it's facilitating us being able to plan for the entirety of the work. So the stage that we're at right now is that the groups will all be online. We may have ability to bring some of the folks that are local together, but we're not going to expect people, we're not going to put that barrier out and have people have to come to a physical location for a meeting. So all panelists will be invited to be online. And we're in an unprecedented situation. They have not done that before, but that's kind of what we need to do, given the fact that our deadline hasn't changed for finishing the work, and there was support for doing this project from you all and from the City Council. There was discussion about that at the council meeting as well, not only Healthy Democracy, but just generally starting public engagement in the pandemic when we're in the situation that we're in. It is challenging, but we're making the best of it and innovating, I think, with the tools that we have, and trying some things that we just haven't done before.
Thank you. So I guess one of my questions, and this would maybe go to something that council brought up too, was making sure, because as I recall, they would reach out, and they were just like picking people at random to be involved and offering them an opportunity to get involved. And I'm hoping that if people don't have the access to the technology, that wouldn't limit them from becoming involved. So whether that means, you know, we're saving money because they're not driving down and doing a bunch of travel time and in person. So maybe some of that money that they're getting paid could help to get technology to people who don't have it, whether that's loaning them a laptop or letting them get a way to get plugged in, so that the people who aren't with high-speed access able to do that. That's one of the concerns I think that council brought up, and in this type of format with Healthy Democracy, I think that might be something to look into.
That's a great idea. Thank you for that. They have a process where they send snail mail letters to folks as the first step, and we've talked to them about doing phone call follow-up depending on the response rate that we get, because this is a different sort of project than they've done in the past. So I think that's a great idea, and we'll have to get creative about what sort of technology the city could offer or Healthy Democracy could offer. We also have some partnership from the state grant that we received from DLCD that's going to support this work. So amongst all of those different angles, I'm confident we can do that. But thank you for the reminder, because that's really important.
Commissioner Brodsky, is that it for you? I'm going to move on to Commissioner Ramey, followed by Commissioner Fragola.
Good evening. Thank you, Commissioners Taylor and Brodsky, for bringing up the two areas of this that I was most curious about. And I think Commissioner Brodsky's comments get to mind about the logistics of how that democracy process is going to work. And it's a new thing, and then we're laying this sort of COVID-19 on top of it. So I'm still very supportive of it. I'm very curious to see how it's going to go. So I'm good to having those details. And then to Commissioner Taylor's comments, I too, and thank you, Commissioner Taylor, for bringing some finer points to those, because I'm really interested in seeing through the equity piece. This is an issue that will touch many members of the community and many members of the community who do not usually get involved in land use issues. And equity will not work unless we reach out to them directly and we make an extra effort. And so I'm particularly encouraged by the equity panel. I think it's called the Equity Roundtable. The idea that they will be compensated for their participation, which I think is important as well. And I just want to urge you again to be sure and take the extra step, the extra email, the extra phone call, whatever it is, because these are not typically individuals who would be involved. And if we don't reach out to them and make the extra effort, I think we're going to lose an opportunity to keep them involved and perhaps build a really strong base of understanding and commitment to these issues. So thanks for your work. I don't really have anything to add to it, except I think it's all great. And thanks to Commissioner Taylor for those fine pointed issues. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. Commissioner Fragla, and then I got Commissioner Beeson.
Great, thank you. So I think you've done some really excellent work with thinking about this public input plan. I too am excited about the healthy democracy as well as certain community stakeholder groups that you're going to be working with. One thing so I have two questions. When I'm looking over the communications and public engagement activities, I know we're going to be relying a lot on digital platforms. So I'm curious if we've seen an increase, because we do have some other recent things to look at, like the ETAC, the digital involvement. If we're seeing an increase in the digital involvement from pre-COVID, if people are really engaging at the same rate pre and during COVID on digital platforms, are we actually seeing an increase? And if we're not seeing an increase, what are we going to do to try and drive people to the digital platform, since that's going to be our primary way of getting people to engage, besides the various stakeholder groups that that the city will be engaging directly with?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to call on Sophie in a second because she has very recent project experience with urban reserves that I think you're alluding to, and it is promising. I'll let her talk about that just a little bit. And also just agree that it is going to be challenging to do all of this work online. And so it's kind of a combination approach, as you know. I feel like we're putting more effort into public engagement and thinking about all of these things than we were pre-COVID, but it's all in a different way. So I'll stop there and let Sophie talk about kind of some of the numbers that we've seen in urban reserves.
Yeah, so most of y'all heard this from me last week, but as a reminder, we pre-COVID for urban reserves, we held a series of 3 open house events in January that were mostly targeted towards folks that live in the county in the urban reserve study area. So the way we advertised those events is we sent out postcards to every single resident and property owner within the study area. We sent out emails to our interested parties list. We advertised it on our planning newsletter that reaches 19,000 people, on Facebook, just the whole thing. And we had 125 people total attend the events. Then when COVID hit and we were gearing up for our options outreach phase, we really had to pay attention to numbers and see how they compared. So we've been tracking it really closely. We advertised our month-long open house, our online open house, all the same ways that we advertised the in-person open house. We kept the open house period longer, hoping that would attract more people. And we received over 1,300 visits to our online open house and over 800 visits to our GIS story map that explained the process. And then we had 210 people take our survey. We used an incentive. We had a $100 grocery gift card that was going to go to a randomly selected survey taker. And that was an example of, incentivizing people to take the survey and having a little bit of a higher turnout. But we had quite a lot of people just visit the page to get the information they need and not necessarily take the survey. And it's actually been very successful.
Great. So that sounds like a really good growth in getting people to engage. And, people certainly have more attention for being in a digital environment. I would just suggest, and I don't think this needs to go into the plan specifically, because obviously you're going to be thinking about the ways you're going to get people to engage with your digital platforms. But in terms of thinking about pushing information instead of expecting people to find the information, there's a lot of great digital tools out there where you can push banner ads on Google, or you can push banner ads out to phones. I don't know if we've tried any of those things. You can, in terms of reaching some of the communities that I know we want to engage with, you can use those tools to geofence certain locations or to target certain, criteria within platforms. So I would really encourage us to start looking at some of the push technologies that are available on digital platforms instead of only limiting ourselves to passive technologies.
Thanks, Commissioner Fragala. I'm just going to chime in right there because this is the one comment that I have, and then I'll go on to Commissioners Beeson and Isaacson. I'm looking at the, where you're talking about the boards, commissions, and local partners, and it doesn't specify this, but every single one of those local partners has extensive networks and newsletters that they send out. And I think that if we were to make it easy for them to broadcast opportunities for their networks to engage, I think that makes it really easy. I know when I was with the chamber, whenever the city would reach out and say, hey, we're doing an open house, and they provided me with some really easy content, that made it really easy for me to put that in an email blast that went out to 5,000 recipients. So I would just encourage you guys to think about how to use those networks, in addition to obviously having representation from them, but also make it easy for them to reach out to those folks. I'm going to go to Commissioner Beeson and then Commissioner Isaacson.
Thanks. First off, to Terry and Sophie, and I'm sure there's probably other staff involved, but I'd commend all of you on the plan. I think it's very thorough, and I think it provides a good foundation for what's going to be a pretty complex process to be sure we're reaching out to everybody who needs to be reached out to, and give them a chance to understand what's going on and to comment and to provide input and to be part of this. And that's particularly in reference to all the different components and parts and pieces of the implementation package to get this all done and have it done by middle of 2022, which I think is not a great deal of time. I guess the one comment I have, and maybe it's a bit of a caution, I'm really not sure there's an issue. I found, since I first looked at it, we looked at it in June, the adoption phase, obviously all phases are going to be very critical. But as I think about it and kind of working backwards, I talked about this a little before, but you have the council with the final decision and a public hearing, and you have the planning commission and public hearing, and then these various parts, the code amendment, the housing chapter, some of those come to mind. I think it's just going to be really important that as that material is developed, and maybe I would call it as it's substantially completed, so it's in draft, but it's pretty much in draft that people can really get it wade into and comment on, that it's done in time to give them sufficient time to provide pretty detailed review. So I'm not sure how that all translates out. I think it looks like, as I look at your schedule, you've got about 5 or 6 months. So I kind of look at the seasonal schedule and trying to translate that back into months, but it looks like you've got 5 or 6 months. So I just sort of offer that up as a caution. I know that there's getting started on all that work is somewhat waiting on the state for certain things to really get going. And so that I'm seeing kind of the period of time for us to do all that is somewhat limited. So otherwise, I really, I appreciate what you've done on it. And again, I think the parts and pieces are there to allow us to get the input from those various constituencies out there that we need to talk to. So thanks.
Okay, I got Commissioner Isaacson, and then I think Kristen, Commissioner Taylor, you wanted a second round. You do have your hand. Okay, we'll go to you next after that. So go ahead, Dan, it's all you.
Thank you. I had 2 parts, and actually, Commissioner Edwards, you took the first part out of my mouth about using the existing kind of infrastructure rather than having to reinvent the wheel. I do think that there's a lot of these groups that are really well connected, and as COVID has drove our population to an online forum, I think they're going to be more engaged through this method. So maybe we could get a little more traction by using the existing infrastructure rather than, again, reinventing the wheel. I guess my question goes back to Commissioner Taylor's analysis, and I can definitely see, I read it completely the other way, but I can see how that would be viewed that way from a different perspective. So I guess, again, it goes back to the author of it, of the document. Is the idea behind singling out or highlighting these specific groups the intention of the author to be that we're going to specifically highlight them because they haven't been highlighted in the past? Because I know that, for example, there are neighborhood groups who don't feel that they have as much input into the city as that they would like to. So by highlighting them and saying, yes, we are going to include you specifically, that's now giving them a shout out to a certain degree, as well as other marginalized groups and that kind of thing, especially in the current environment. So if that's the purpose, is there a way that we can massage the language that still does that without having to make, I think, some people feel as though they needed to be called out, or that the groups needed to be called out, if that makes sense?
I'd like to respond to that, if I could.
Yep, please, go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks for the question. I think in both of the instances that Kristen brought up, we were responding to questions, but I think the most complete list of groups is included in the plan. And so it's probably unnecessary to call out specific ones earlier. And I might disagree with what I just said in the case of underrepresented groups, because the whole lens of equity on this plan is very intentionally first and foremost. And so calling attention to focusing on underrepresented groups is a main strategy. It's an intentional strategy. And that's why I think it's compatible with your discussion and comment at the June meeting about flipping the order of the different groups and listing the equity roundtable first, and listing stakeholders that focus on that lens first. It elevates that element of the project. And so that's by way of explanation for calling out underrepresented groups. But the other reference to neighborhood associations, I believe was in a response to a question from our own staff about how they would be involved in the project. And so we added them as an example of a local partner group, but they're in the exhaustive list. So I don't think it necessarily has to be called out in the other location.
Okay, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. Okay, situation. So thank you, Commissioner Isaacson, for further clarifying. So some of the reason why I brought up some of the points that I made was just paying attention to language and the potential impact of language. If our objective is diversity and social inclusion, just being mindful of how it's presented. Because while listing one, like you said, Terry, is in the exhaustive list, it's listed there. And then by listing the others in a different section, but only two of them or one in each case, others could feel excluded there. So anyways, I wanted to add one other thing under equity roundtable. Some other marginalized groups might be good to consider, like sponsors, women's space. So just thinking a little bit beyond where are these marginalized groups, especially as we're talking about critical need of survival, housing. Okay, that's it. Thanks. Sorry, I'm talking weird because I have feedback. I'll try to fix it for the next time.
You're not talking weird because we can't hear it, but I understand what you're talking about. So, Terry, I'll give you any opportunity to respond if you have anything.
There we go. I think it's at the will of the commission whether to make these changes or not. They're all perfectly great suggestions. And I would add that this is not meant to be the be all end all. If a group's not listed in this plan, we can't reach out to them. That's totally fine. We can add people along the way. And that's also not meant to stop you from adding things to the plan. It can be flexible. We do ask for your formal action because that is part of your role as the Citizen Involvement Committee for the city. But this plan does not have to stop evolving after your action. So I just wanted to make that clear. And then anything any of you would like to propose as changes are welcome, and we'll make those and send out that final version to you. If assuming that your vote accepts them.
Well, I will just chime in and say I'm comfortable with the plan as is. I think that we've articulated things that I don't know that necessarily need to be reflected, or at least I'll speak for myself. I think that if anybody has very specific changes, I would entertain those. I think what we've talked about is pretty general. So I feel like we've kind of thrown out some ideas and things to consider, but I don't see anything that's a tangible, necessarily change this word or take out this group. So look into the group. If you want to have changes implemented, I think that we could be open to that. And I'd like to get us to a motion so that we could at least decide if we're going to adopt it with XYZ changes or where we would go from there. So, Commissioner Taylor.
So one edit or proposed suggested change, I'm a little, it feels awkward to say Black and Indigenous and people of color identify groups. Because if you look at the definition, I mean, so I just want to communicate sensitively. So other people of color identify groups. Yeah, so that's,
okay, yeah. Go ahead, Commissioner Frogala, because I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead. You're muted.
Kristen, I think that that's a new term that is becoming more widely accepted. I don't know if you've heard BIPOC, but that's what BIPOC is, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so we might actually make that a little more clear. See, it's more clear now by capitalizing Black, capitalizing Indigenous, capitalizing people and capitalizing color and then putting BIPOC in parentheses after that. But I feel like it is becoming a very clearly accepted term in the canon. So I think it just needs a little clarification there.
Yeah. Okay. I concur with that. And I got a thumbs up from Kristen. So I think she's.
And I guess
yes.
I would say I'm assuming some of those little editing details can be made for clarity, that we don't need to have a motion on those little editing details. Am I correct about that, Terry? Or do you want a motion about that?
Well, I'll just list them off. The ones that I heard were sort of minor, and if that covers it, I do think we should include in the motion that the changes as described, as I'm about to describe, are part of the motion. That makes it the clearest. So the ones I wrote down as being word changes or formatting changes are: page 1, add the term diversity. Page 2, massage the language about calling out underrepresented groups. And I talked about that a minute ago. I'm not sure which page the neighborhood associations are called out on, but I would propose removing that call out and then clarifying BIPOC, the use of BIPOC, and the formatting spacing weirdness on page 9. Did I get them all? Okay.
You're muted, Tiffany.
Oh, sorry. Discussion on that. Should we get a motion on the table?
I move to move the public participation plan forward as amended.
I'll second it.
Right. Any further discussion? Hold on. Commissioner Beeson, is your hand up for a new time?
My hand is up.
Go for it.
I would amend the motion. I'm not sure how this is friendly or whatever. Just, I think we ought to move to approve the public involvement plan as opposed to move it forward. So the public involvement plan as proposed by staff to support implementation of HB 2001. And maybe as with edits as discussed in the meeting.
I'll accept that as a friendly.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion? All right. I'll call for a vote. All of those in favor for, don't make me repeat this, for approving the plan with edits as discussed by staff. Go ahead and raise your hand. Just do this. There we go. All right. And then those opposed. All right. Motion carries. Thank you, guys. You meet my internal deadline. I had a time in my head that I was going to really try to get us to. So
it was 6:15, wasn't it?
It was.
It was. Awesome. Thank you guys very much. I forgot to say, we anticipate being back before you as a body probably in December, but there will be multiple opportunities for participating as planning commissioners in some of these events over the fall. So stay tuned for that.
Perfect. Thanks, Terry.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everybody involved. You guys do such a great job. So we're going to move on to our next agenda item. I'm going to scroll up here just so I have the AIS in front of me. Oh, no, that's something else. Okay, so sorry, bear with me. I'm scrolling. All right, so the deliberations on the digital sign code amendment. And I'm just going to kind of very high level talk about this, and then we'll have staff really kind of go into some more greater details. So today, we have today set aside for deliberations. We also have some time on the 24th. And obviously we had a public hearing back on the 28th. And we are going to go through, and Janessa has got answers to a lot of the questions. If you guys recall, we went through quite a few questions that had come up. And so we will go through all of that. One of the things that has transpired in more recently, if you remember, as we were discussing it, I was kind of mistaken and not quite understanding, but in a legislative matter, the record just stays open. So we didn't actually really close the record. And then obviously this is a recommendation that we would be making to council. We were looking to have feedback from folks in by August 4th so that we could have time to review everything for deliberations. However, Public Works, City of Eugene, has kind of come back with a memo, and they've made some recommendations and pointed out some data, more for lack of a better term, just some data, some studies that really kind of present a case that I believe, and we discussed this ahead of time, I really believe that you all as the Planning Commission, I know you, and I know you will want to have an opportunity to review that information. So what I had proposed that we do, and please, by all means, if I'm way off basis with this, but I had proposed that we go ahead and move forward with our discussion today, but we not try to take any action before we've had a chance for you all to read through that, and for the proponents of this code amendment to have an opportunity to also respond. So that's kind of what we're looking to do today. So I just want you all to know that there's some information that you haven't had a chance to review that's going to be referenced, and I would like you all to have a chance to review that. So I'm going to let Janessa fill in the holes if I forgot anything. The other thing I will say just briefly is that, well, I'll let Janessa talk about this, but we're talking about trying to get Public Works staff so that you all have, if you have questions that could be directed to them, you have the opportunity to get those questions answered. So that is my goal with being able to present you all with as much information to make the a full recommendation to council that you feel good about, because you feel like you've had the opportunity to review everything. So Janessa, I'm sure I missed all kinds of things, so feel free to fill in the holes.
Very well.
I'll kick it over to you.
Okay, so first of all, I'll introduce myself for any of the public watching. I'm Janessa Dragovich, Senior Planner with Building and Permit Services. Here tonight with me is Mike McCarrow. He's also a planner with Building and Permit Services and is my partner on this project, as well as we have Lauren Summers from the City Attorney's Office joining us as well. So first I wanted to do kind of a little, I'm going to share my screen, and I have kind of a brief agenda, and I'll describe what we're going to talk about tonight, and then follow up with a little bit more information about what Commissioner Edwards just mentioned. So let me share my screen. I'll give that a second to pop up for you. And can I get some nods? Does everybody see an agenda? Awesome, thank you for that. So first we'll do a quick recap. So we came to you on July 10th for the work session to kind of introduce this project that was council initiated. And then we followed up with the week later, we held the public hearing before you to give people a chance to weigh in on it. And then now tonight we're back for round one of kind of deliberations. And originally we had scheduled this as deliberations and possible action or recommendation to council. However, as Commissioner Edwards mentioned, we did receive a memo. We had reached out to our Public Works co-workers to ask them to kind of review some of the studies and the materials regarding the safety on digital billboards, because it's not in the area of our expertise. And so we wanted to give them a chance to weigh in on it and see if they had any responses to some of the questions that have come up around like the duration of, or the dwell time of the signs and how long the message is there. So we did that, and we did receive a memo yesterday from them that we would like to provide to you so that you can read it for yourself. However, since we did kind of set that soft close for August 4th for the record on this, and this is a legislative process, so that was not a hard record. It's not the same as when you review quasi-judicial applications where the timelines are very prescribed. In this case, we can kind of reopen and allow testimony to come in. This way we can provide the memo to you, as well as sending it out to the interested parties to give them a chance to also provide you with some additional testimony and response, and then give you some time to absorb all of that material and then come back together to finish our deliberations and potentially take action on a recommendation on August 24th. So that's kind of the plan and the last minute shift that we've been going through today and tomorrow, or yesterday and today. So the changes to the draft language since the public hearing was provided as attachment A in your agenda packet. So while I do have that up, and when we get to the question sections, we can talk about the changes that were put in there, but at this point, I don't want to go through that document and take the time for efficiency. I think that there were only a few changes, and we tried to provide pretty descriptive information. And the couple items that we mentioned that we were reaching out to Public Works transportation staff, those I don't think that we should dive into those until you've had a chance to read the memo. And then it may be best to hold those questions or until you've had all of the information in front of you. But we do have those if there is a question, I can put that up. Next, what I plan on doing is I created a document that has all of the follow-up questions from your public hearing on the 28th. And so we had answered some of the questions live during the meeting, so those aren't included here. These were all of the items that we needed to follow up and come back to you for deliberations with responses. So I'll share that document next, and we can walk through that question by question, and I'll update you on a response. And I'd like to kind of flow through that a little bit and just give you a little, read it out and present it, and then maybe hold questions until we get to the very end, and then open it up for any questions on the whole gamut of possible questions. So with that, then finally we'll give you a chance, again, a chance to ask questions, and then we can determine whether we have any additional follow-up to do before the 24th. I do want to mention one thing really quickly before we dive in. We'll try to reach out and have somebody from Public Works join us on the 24th. At this point, I don't know whether we'll be able to have somebody with us. We're hoping to. Regardless, if you, as you're reviewing the memo and maybe diving into studies, depending on how much research you're wanting to do, if questions are coming up for you, the earliest we can get them, if you could send them, like email them to myself or Mike, then we can compile those questions. And especially in the event that if we're not able to have a staff person come and represent and field questions for you on the 24th, we can do our best to reach out and get those questions answered and have the responses for on the 24th. So just a polite request to email us when you have them. So now I'm going to switch to the follow-up questions. Is this size okay for everybody? Again, a head nod will give me a good indication. Can you read the text there?
I can only see part of it. I'm not sure why.
So what's the bottom line that you can see, Commissioner Fragola?
I can't see the left side of it. So you started to move it and I started to be able to see it. So
when I wiggle it, oh, you muted again.
Can you move it left to right?
No, I only have the up and down scroll bar because the whole document's in view. Let me try zooming in a little bit and see if that helps.
I can see it now. I don't know if it was a change that I made or.
Okay.
No. So you are moving it left to right, and you had positioned it so I could see it in the screen, and now you moved it out of view again.
Oh, I didn't move it at all.
No, I'm wondering, Commissioner Fragler, do you have what's in the way of it? Is it all of our faces or the panelists or something? I'm just wondering because this
Yeah,
technology.
I have everything set up in side-by-side mode. Okay, so all right, I got it. I just shifted it to a different side-by-side.
Okay, I think we're good.
So I'm going to point out, because as we go through this, the response document, I do have two follow-up visuals that I'll be jumping over to. And the one that I want to point out, I'm going to go ahead and show you in a second. One of the questions was regarding how many digital billboards would we see if we go with all major arterials as the industry had requested. So what we did was, we took the map that we had shown you at the public hearing, I believe, that had the black dots for every existing location of a billboard within Eugene to begin with. And then we highlighted the major arterial segments that we had drafted the original code to allow digital billboards along these major arterials. These fuchsia boxes are the segments that were not included that the industry would like us to include, that they had asked to allow all major arterials. And those are the ones that would be added if you choose to make that change. We had a staff person take a look at each of these billboards and try to determine which direction they're facing, because to try to estimate the actual future capacity, it partly depends on which direction the billboard's facing, because the 1,200-foot spacing requirement is for billboards facing the same direction. And so these yellow arrows show which direction each individual billboard is facing. And then the black dots that have a little yellow or a little red symbol are the ones that staff kind of just did a thought experiment and went, if this billboard's digital, which we knew this was one of the 10 that the industry preferred, you'll notice that all 10 of those are called out in those locations so that you can see the ones that they're most concerned about converting. And so we kind of truth checked a bit of this, and we did find that there's some billboards that were shown on here that are either no longer there or were incorrect. So some of those just have X's just to try to kind of provide a better information here. But staff did count up the different segments based on using the draft code standards and taking a 1,200-foot separation for billboards facing the same direction, and estimates that based on that and not including the segments that we had originally not included, there would be about 60 potential digital billboards. The 59 here is the count that they came up with. Keeping in mind, I want to caveat that this is a difficult thing to estimate because we have multiple standards at play, and so there may be reasons that they're not possible to build based on the standard, all of the standards, and we might be missing a little something. And it's also possible that it's just not feasible for the market for them to convert them all. So just because the capacity shows that number, we really don't know exactly what we will see over the long term in terms of conversions. To add in these segments, we estimated that there'd be another about 3 that would be added into that capacity. So again, we're looking somewhere around an estimate of 60 potential digital billboards based on the way the standards are drafted now, assuming a long-term that we realized all of these. So now I'm going to go back to the questions. So I kind of covered that just now, the 60 digital billboards using the 1,200-foot separation requirement. Adding those segments would add plus or minus 3. So, and then I'll go into a little more detail in a minute because Commissioner Fragola had another question similar. Next, though, let's talk about the state standard that was brought up about renewable power And Commissioner Ramey had asked if we could find out a little bit more about that and was curious kind of the economic effect and whether it would be burdensome to the industry. So we actually had a difficult time finding it and reached back out to the industry, and they provided us with the OAR that that they were referring to. So in reading this rule, it's not really a requirement to use renewable energy. So we were a little uncertain about how it was applied, and so we reached out to ODOT staff to find out. And now our understanding based on that conversation is that this isn't a requirement, but rather a way to track and provide an affidavit for tax credit purposes if they're pursuing tax credits based on renewable energy. But the bottom line is that yes, the city could add a renewable power requirement. But some thoughts from staff are whether it's necessary and whether it would be burdensome, as Commissioner Ramey had asked. Regarding whether it's necessary, we also reached out to our sustainability program staff, and they mentioned that energy consumption is not a high concern as electricity is close to carbon neutral in Eugene already. And then there was a climate policy strategist that one of the sustainability folks reached out to, and they weighed in and agreed that given the LED technology used, they're not likely to have a huge energy demand. So there may be aesthetics concerns also with solar panels. We do have some images if anybody's interested in that, but when you add solar panels, you're also adding another element of kind of clutter to an already large billboard. And so just something else to consider is that there might be some aesthetic concerns too. Regarding the economic effect or burden, we'd really like to hear more from the industry as we move forward if the commission wants to add that as a recommendation to council. I think that we're not really in a position to determine what those would be, but if that's a direction that you're wanting to recommend to council, then I think that they'll still have time to weigh in on that and can let us know whether there are any concerns about that.
Janessa, can I just interrupt really quick? I do have Commissioner Beeson in the queue, and I'm guessing he probably maybe have something very specific to one of these first couple things. So I want to give him the opportunity so that we're not skipping way ahead. Commissioner Beeson, do you have a question?
I guess, yeah, I was just getting in the queue to make a comment, but it's specifically got to do with the major arterials. So
okay, so we'll wait. We can wait then?
I can wait.
Okay, no problem.
And there may be a little bit of overlap because there were a few of the questions that were a little similar. As I already mentioned, Commissioner Borofsky and Commissioner Frageles were a little bit similar, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that their items that they brought up were addressed. So, so on to Commissioner Frageles. Next one was a clarification on the map and whether all of the major arterials were included and the visual. So that was the intent in adding those fuchsia highlights to show the segments of major arterials that were excluded, but could be added to the current draft. Proposed language does not loosen the billboard standards, so we're not anticipating that there would be a lot of new billboard sites, whether static or digital. Some potential existing sites would likely go undeveloped because market forces, like, there may not be property owners willing to lease the sites. There could be insufficient traffic in the location to make it worthwhile. That's just hard for staff to quantify or capture. Industry representatives have expressed that there's little, if any, unrealized potential remaining, and that's been consistent over several years, not just now. Proposed standards would require the 1,200-foot separation between digital billboards facing the same direction, and staff estimates that capacity again at approximately 60 based on the 1,200-foot separation that we have in place now. And just a reminder, the 1,200-foot separation was the method that we proposed to try to deal with the proliferation issue concern and not allowing too much visual clutter. That's definitely a number that we expect to hear you know, some people may think that it should be less, and some people may think that it should be more. It is a dial or a lever that you can use to kind of control the overall capacity that would be allowed. So just something to keep in mind. Next, we'll go into Commissioner Isaacson pointed out that from the testimony that on page 29 or 79, sorry, the last paragraph referenced an opinion that the 3 square foot allowance and the 5 character limitation that is existing in code now for electronic message centers or EMCs, that there was a statement that that's not safely viewable or legible. And so in our follow-up, we wanted to clarify, as mentioned before, EMCs are typically only comprising a portion of a larger sign. So this image here shows what a typical EMC is. This is what this is the 3 square foot and 5 character limitation is sufficient for a time and typical time and temperature display that the EMCs allow. And the limitations like this don't apply to public signs like the Holt Center lamp bank that provides information about upcoming events or outside of a community center. So those don't have the same 3 foot limitation. And so the ones that are providing a larger message really do have more space. And as proposed under our draft code, the institutional uses would have 20 square feet of digital space to provide a message. Another requested follow-up from Commissioner Isaacson was regarding the limit on how often, it was also something from testimony regarding a limit on how often the content can change per day for the service stations and whether that constituted regulating content. And so our response to that is that recognizing whether the display copy changes and the frequency of that change is not a regulation of the content itself. And staff had reached out and found that these signs are typically only changed once per day. And that's why we believe the 24-hour limitation is appropriate for that particular requirement. The next one is Commissioner Beeson wanting us to provide any input as to if you recall, there were 4 particular topics that the industry asked for as changes to the draft code. And so in response to those 4 specifics, the first one is the dwell time, and we had drafted the initial starting point at 10 seconds. And they have requested that we reduce that down to 8 seconds, which is consistent with the minimum requirement, the minimum limitation from the Oregon revised statute. So embedded in the definition of digital billboard in the Oregon revised statutes is that the message must be held at least 8 seconds. So on that topic, this is one where originally we felt that there wasn't a huge difference between 8 and 10. However, because it's mentioned in the memo from Public Works, we want to avoid deliberating on that particular topic until you've had a chance to read that memo. Allowance on all major arterials is the next item. And again, we received the feedback from Public Works that indicates that they have concerns regarding locations of the digital billboards with respect to locations with high bicycle or pedestrian traffic, access density, so how many access points are coming onto the roadway, and then busy intersections or near on and off ramps. So their input wasn't specific to the map or draft standards. So we're still going to need to work with them a little bit more to see if they wish to provide more specific suggestions, and also want you to have a chance to kind of digest that memo and see what your thoughts and questions are coming out of that. The next thing is the 1,200 foot spacing requirement for digital billboards facing the same direction was the clarification that they requested that we add. And we did, I believe we did add that in the draft because that was the intention that we had in mind when we were drafting this language, However, again, this is another one that might be impacted by the memo. And so we maybe want to wait to really deliberate on the spacing until you've had a chance to review more of the material before the 24th. The final one is the request for a city managed permit process. And I think this was also referred to as the draft lottery. On that one, I'm going to show you a process flow and kind of describe how we're seeing how we would handle the first come first serve kind of how we would determine that date. So I'm going to switch screens to this flow chart. So typically when a sign permit is being submitted, it goes through our electronic permit system called eBuild. So it's digitally submitted through that system, which means it'll have a date and time stamp on it. So an application or applications would come through, then it has to go through a bit of a completeness review that our intake staff performs to determine whether we have enough information to review the permit. If that is deemed complete, then what we're proposing as the policy we would use would be that the date of the original submittal would be used for the first come first serve date. So it would come in and get date stamped, assuming it's complete and everything's there and it's thorough application, then we would go back to the date that it was submitted, and that would become their kind of seniority date. Assuming there's not enough information and intake staff needs to notify them that they need to submit additional items, then the applicant would submit supplemental information. Again, that information would be date and time stamped in the system, and it would go through another iterative process. So if it's complete at that point, we would take the date of the submittal of the last supplemental information that made it complete as the date for their first come first serve. If it's missing, then you just keep cycling through this process until we have a complete application and that date established. So that's the direction that staff would prefer to go in terms of how we would process the 12 and regulate the 1,200 foot separation requirement, because that's really the crux of it. Is if an applicant comes in and converts a digital billboard, then it effectively means that no one within 1,200 feet facing the same direction would be able to convert that digital billboard. And that's why there's a bit of an issue. However, to embed language in the code and to do the process proposed, we just feel it's a lot more intensive for staff and difficult to regulate. And this is the approach we would like to take. So I'm going to go back to the follow-up, and that's another diagram that I will include when I provide some follow-up materials from tonight's meeting.
Vanessa, can I ask a quick question about that?
Mm-hmm.
Are the billboards already accounted for though? So we're talking about conversion of existing, correct? So they're already basically spoken for. Somebody already owns them all. They just have to like decide if they would want to convert. Is that so I'm trying to assess like whether or not there'd be opportunity for somebody outside our area to come in and put up a digital billboard. And I guess my understanding was that they already exist. Billboards already exist. We're talking about conversion of existing billboards. So the players are already in the market is essentially what I'm trying to say. Is that correct or no?
Yes, I can respond to that. So in talking with the billboard industry, our standards have remained the same pretty much through lots of decades. So all of the effective locations have existing billboards. And so there might be a few that could meet the standards, but they're on low volume streets where more of a significant investment like a digital billboard really probably wouldn't pencil out. And so while we can't say prohibitively that no spaces are available, almost all the viable ones have been used for some years, many years.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go back here. So the next one, Commissioner Borofsky asked if there's other areas that we could say that we wanted to limit. And so, yes, absolutely. The commission may recommend further limiting the locations where digital billboards are allowed. This really is a policy discussion that we as staff are looking to you as well as the council to determine that, what the right size and what the appropriate areas, and vetting the information that you're getting from testimony and the memo from Public Works, I think will kind of play into your decision on what you do for the recommendation there. But what we've provided is just a first take on it, and you absolutely have the ability to make recommendations to limit it further or to add the extra locations that the industry has requested. See, I think I already answered the preferred approach. That goes back to the so the preferred approach from the industry includes adding code language that would basically become kind of defunct after 5 years. And so that's a big part of the reason that staff is hesitant to do that, is we know we're already dealing with a sign code that was drafted in 1989, I believe. And code changes don't come easily, and it's a lot of work. And so it's just our professional preference to not create things that then sunset and then without a mechanism to easily remove them. There was also some, this wasn't necessarily, I can't remember if this was in the work session, but I know that this had come up where there was some interest in understanding a little bit more information on regarding the legal non-conforming billboards that are currently in Eugene. So again, there are about 120 billboards in Eugene, and approximately 20% of those are legal non-conforming with respect to at least one standard. These numbers provided here are calling out per standard how many billboards are non-conforming regarding that standard. So there is some overlap here, so don't just tally up these numbers and assume that that's the amount. It's really about 20% of the 120 that have non-conformities, and some of them have multiple. But this will give you an idea of separation. There's some, and this separation is based on the existing separation requirement for non-digital billboards. So it's the 300 feet between billboards facing the same direction or on the same side of the street, and 150 on opposite sides of the street. Size, there's most areas, the size is limited to 250 square feet. However, there's 3 street segments that allow up to 300 square feet. But of these 18, we just wanted to point out that only 3 of those are over 300 square feet. Then the other thing, I'm not going to walk through the rest of these. I think they're self-explanatory. The next thing that we followed up with was regarding the public service announcements or donating time to nonprofits or city or government messaging. Or we reached out to the industry to find out how they handle that, to get a little bit better idea for you, since we cannot regulate that, or we can't require it because it would be regulating content if we did. But we've been told that it's industry standard to provide this as a service. So the response was that each company does it slightly differently. We heard from somebody at Meadow, and so I won't read that word for word, but you can look at that when you get the material. But it's somewhat their process is a little informal, but basically people can request that they provide some ad time, and then they can either provide a copy of an ad that they can use, or they'll work with nonprofits to design an ad that works as well. So that's the information that we got from them and are passing on. And that was that was the follow-up, specific follow-up questions that we had. I think I'll flip it back to, or I can take it off of this, and then if you want me to share my screen again so that I can scroll back to something, I can, but I'm not sure that we'll necessarily need it to field questions, and we can move to that next.
Okay, so Commissioner Beeson, you were in there first, and so I'll go ahead and let you go first, followed by Commissioner Fragola.
So I have is it okay for me to make a comment? This isn't really a question. Are we in just questions, or are we in deliberation, or can I make a comment?
I would say you are welcome to make a comment. If Lauren disagrees with me for some legal reason, then I would welcome your comment.
Okay, well, let me just toss it out there. I've this has sort of been on my mind since we first started this at the other meeting, and it's the request from the industry to be able to utilize or expand the arterial capacity, if you will. Now, as I really do need to, I think, digest all the material that Janessa just presented to get a good idea of the extent of that. And it sounds like also the Public Works memo, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there. Just, I think the motion from the council, and this was observed early on by Mike, the motion from the council is very specific, and basically says we are to amend the sign code to allow digital billboards and digital reader boards. And the way I read it, staff can make additional amendments to the regulations to allow those changes to be made. And as I read the proposed amendments, we've got some housekeeping things in there, which I think are all fine. But I think the intent of the motion was quite narrow. And I wasn't really reading the motion to allow us to do more substantive things. So when they suggested, gosh, maybe we ought to be able to put more signs on more arterials, the more I thought about it, I don't think that's really what was intended by the motion. Now, having heard tonight that it sounds like, well, gosh, we've got X number out there, and maybe what this would do is add 3 billboards. I don't know how big a deal that is, but I guess I just want to kind of put that out there, that as I read the amendments, what I'm kind of looking for is that we're staying in line with what I think the intent of Councilor Pryor's motion was. So I'll leave it at that.
And I'll just comment a little bit on major arterials. So with some initial discussions with the billboard industry, we were learning more about digital billboards and where they most likely would go. Staff in the draft proposed long segments of major arterials, kind of like spokes of the wheel, so to speak. However, we didn't focus on street classifications. And so these 3 smaller segments of streets, Garfield, Mill, and Broadway, are actually major arterials, even though they're not longer, like West 11th or River Road, or I'm sorry, Highway 99. And so there was not a strong analysis by staff to exclude these 3 small segments. And so it actually would be a cleaner to allow them. And then we could say all major arterials are allowed. So there wasn't a specific reason we excluded them before. We were just focusing on the longer segments. And as we talked about, if we did include them, it looks like it would potentially provide for 3 additional digital billboards.
Thank you, Mike, for your response. Commissioner Fragola.
Great. And my question was actually related to what Mike just said about what was the thinking behind not including those fuchsia areas. But I was wondering if you could pop the map back on on the screen? Because I do have a question about that section between High and Patterson that is in fuchsia, because it does seem like that section is I can't tell from the size of the map here, and I'm certainly happy to go back, and you said that this map was interactive, correct, Janessa?
Janessa, you're.
I know. I had to find my unmute since I'm sharing my screen. It jumped. So it's not necessarily interactive. But it's a big map in a PDF form, and I'm assuming you're going to want to zoom way in and kind of pan around. Oh, and you're muted now, Commissioner Fagley.
Thanks. That section of the city is a particularly heavily trafficked section of the city. Does it include the off ramps coming down onto Franklin Boulevard? I mean, I guess that's one thing I would want to be looking at, because even though it's only potentially 2 signs, I don't particularly know if I would want to add changing digital signs in that particular intersection in the city, because it's such a high volume chaos area. But Mike, thank you. You answered my question as to what was staff's original thinking. Another question that I did have is that I guess I was thinking in the same terms that Commissioner Edwards was thinking, that we're talking about replacing current billboards. And I totally get your explanation around, you can't, that there could potentially be one that does come, but we have heard that it's pretty saturated. I guess what I hadn't realized, and some of your information tonight sort of led me to believe, is it possible that what is currently there will get bigger, or do they have to stay the same size?
Yes. Well, in the draft code, we have allowed them to replace what is there, even if there are some legal nonconformities, like we talked earlier. Say, it was common in the past to have 288 square feet billboards. There are some of those where the code currently requires 250 feet in area. We would allow them to replace that with the exact same traditional billboard with a digital billboard. But in no cases can they exceed 300 square feet. That would only apply to 3 billboards that are currently over 300 square feet. So it really is intended and written to be replaced in kind without, and we just don't see perhaps a property owner has not wanted to deal with any of the current billboard companies and changes their mind. But I'm not sure any of those situations exist out there. That's the only possible scenario we could think of where actually a new billboard would be created. And I think that's highly unlikely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I just moved to this section to show what Mike was just speaking about in terms of we carved out a little bit of a allowance for some legal nonconformities to be kept basically or grandfathered. However, this is where we did include no digital billboard shall be larger than 300 square feet. And as I mentioned previously, in that table of legal nonconforming billboards that currently exist, there's only 3 of them that are over 300 square feet that would actually need to reduce down to 300 feet if they converted to digital.
So, but I guess then I wonder if there's a billboard that's only 200 square feet, they could replace it with a 300 square foot billboard. So then the answer to the question is that billboards might get larger when they convert them to digital.
They could potentially go to 250. Most locations are limited to 250 square feet, not 300. And so if it's a 200 square foot billboard, then it may be able to increase to 250, only 300 if it's on like I-105 or I-5, or Mike can fill in, there's a third segment that goes to the 300 feet.
Yeah, a portion of Beltline. It would be, again, unlikely because when the billboard was originally placed, there's about 5 other standards that they have to comply with, partly based on the length of the building walls on the site, an overall maximum signage for billboards and other signs, as well as the 1,300 square feet within a half mile. So when that initial billboard was probably maximized at the time. And so I think it would be very unlikely for when the conversion happened that all of a sudden there was additional capacity and still have to meet all those other standards.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, my window went away. Hold on, I think Commissioner Borowski was next in the queue, and then Commissioner Rainey.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the section that Commissioner Fragola brought up, I'm in the same vein there. One other thing that we know, just because we've been on Planning Commission for a while and have seen an application, there's going to be a large building built right on that corner there as well. That's going to be 7 or 9 stories. Again, I'm anticipating that the memo from Public Works is going to tie in with the Vision Zero work that's been going on in the city. And I know that that's a council policy. So whatever we can do to help buy into Vision Zero, I think is responsible on our part. For me personally, I can live with the changing over from existing billboards to digital billboards, having them being 1,200 feet apart. I do not feel comfortable with a proliferation of more digital billboards. So opening it up to all arterials would be something that I would could not support moving forward if the commission would agree with that. The last thing that I would say on the draft lottery, as far as that goes, I can agree with what staff has put forward, but I think that there needs to be a public outreach to every owner of the billboards before this goes out there, so that, you know, kind of like a postcard or something that goes out to people and says, hey, listen, this is coming up. Your billboard has the opportunity to go digital, but if somebody within 1,200 feet of it goes digital before you, you won't have that opportunity. So, and that everybody is on the same playing field, not just people who are tuned into this process, that know the game, just so that there's a fair playing field for when you shoot the gun off on the race to go digital, that everybody is at the starting line and there's not some people that are still in the locker room. Thank you.
I do want to comment on to that respect. We do have the interested parties list that's comprised of the industry representatives who are who have assets here in Eugene, so they are very plugged in, as well as all of our sign companies that have done business in Eugene within the last year or two. They've been notified of this process and are aware of these changes. So we can look into whether a mail out would be required. It does have an expense attached to it, and we weren't given any funding to do any of that type of outreach. So I'd want to consult with Alyssa and find out whether we can do that, or whether we're okay reaching out to, as we are with our interested parties, and keep bringing them along this process with us. So does that get at your concern, knowing that they're included in the interested parties list and are receiving email updates and being notified that way?
Well, I guess so, but to an extent that you're reaching out to the people who are renting and leasing the billboards, not necessarily the property owners who actually have the ability to, say, I want, because they may have a billboard on their property right now that is just a generic billboard, but when they realize, oh, I can make this a digital billboard, they may want to reach out to whoever they're leasing that space to and talk to them. I mean, I know if I had the right to, again, and I'm not sure how the leasing as opposed to ownership goes with all these billboards. So that's just a question. I just would hate to see somebody, say, kind of like what we had happen with the marijuana shops in the 1,200-foot buffer. Mike knows about that, where we put the 1,200-foot buffer in, and then somebody who said, hey, wait a second, I wanted to do this. I've got this in my business plan, and this guy jumped the claim on me, and now I can't do it. That's just what I'm trying to not have happen.
Okay, we'll look into that too. So.
Okay, Commissioner Ramey.
Okay, I have 3 quick things. I'm still a little confused about the major arterial request from the industry. If I'm looking at a major arterial map, and it includes River Road, but River Road's not a part of this current proposal. So the industry's not really saying they want to expand onto River Road. They're saying just the little pieces that are in the system that fell off the table they want to put back. Is that correct?
I'm going to share my screen one more time.
And I'll just jump in a little bit. So on the map, in our current highway, commercial, and industrial sign standards sections, we have for many decades listed the major arterials that allow billboards. So Commissioner Ramey, you are correct in that River Road, I think, is the one exception that is a major arterial, but it was never included in to allow billboards. And so that is a caveat that we did not share. So that's a good catch. So we are only showing the major arterials that currently allow billboards. And with Commissioner Borowski's comment, I just want to clarify that the 3 segments in Fuchsia, the Garfield, Mill, and Broadway currently do allow billboards. That's why there are there. In hindsight, staff may have just included them in the draft. Then we would include all the major arterials. And as I stated before, there was no analysis done for specific reasons to not include them. It was just at the time the thinking of the longer segments when we talk about major arterials rather than street classifications.
And I'll just point out, part of why I wanted to bring the map up again was to point out that number 6 of the digital billboards from the list of 10 that the industry has identified does fall in that segment. And I think that that's probably why that generated that response and request from them, was because when they evaluated the 10 that they were wanting to convert, and as top priority, one of those falls within that segment that was omitted.
Okay, thank you. Number 2, the Amber Alerts, PSAs, public service announcements. I think it's great that the industry shows us what their common practices are. I wish that we could somehow legislate that, but I know there's the slippery slope there. So I'll just leave it at that. But it was good to see what they practice. And I wish there was a way, like radio stations, I think it's TV stations, as part of their licensing, are required to dedicate a certain amount of airtime to these kinds of things. I don't know, we want to tread into that. So number 3 then is the power. I'm really talking about renewable power. Our own utility recognizes their green power program. With a slight increase in your charge, you can opt into that program. I think if our own utility is saying, hey, we can do better than just a hydro that we 90% of the time, we can even go beyond that. I think as a leader in this kind of thing, the city should consider the same idea with the billboards to really ask that they use renewable power in energizing those boards. That's it.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think also if the industry can tell us how many kilowatt hours they're going to generate, what it's going to charge to energize those boards, then we can get a firm handle on, well, is it $1 more a month or is it $100? You know, what we figure it out because eWeb has an equation for that. So if we can get response from them about, well, how much power are you drawing on these boards, then we can know what the implications are. Thank you.
I have two thoughts to share, and one is in response to Commissioner Ramey. I agree, but I also think that there is a cost to producing the traditional type of billboard, which is pretty invasive. So I mean, it's also made of vinyl, which doesn't go anywhere but the landfill. So I think that if we're going to talk about the cost in kilowatts, I also think we, have to consider that. The only other thing I want to just put out there, I mean, this is just, me wearing kind of my legislative hat and more thinking about this a little bit broader, is that, we're talking about doing, having this process accommodating the industry, when in actuality, what in my opinion, this is going to provide an opportunity that doesn't exist right now for businesses and for Amber Alerts and nonprofits. Because right now, as somebody who used to buy media, if you want to buy a billboard, it's really expensive and you have to buy it for like 3 months. And the opportunity to digitize in some of our billboards really does provide an opportunity for small businesses or other entities that really have no other way to promote themselves in an affordable way. So I just want to remind everybody that there is actually more than just giving these companies a way to make more money. I do actually think that it helps provide a resource for small businesses who really do struggle with trying to figure out how to promote themselves in our market. So those are my comments. And I do think that it's really important for us to take a look at what Public Works has. And I also would hope that those who are listening from the industry can also take a look and provide any kind of context that might also help us address those issues, because it sounds to me like they're related to safety and related to some of the other planning processes that we're engaged in, like Vision Zero. And so I think, that's why it's really why I felt that it was really important that we have the time to review that stuff, because I know it will probably impact my decisions. Anybody else have thoughts or go ahead, Janessa? Yeah.
I just want to, this is a good segue, or not segue, but chance for me to kind of chime in a little bit, because environmental impacts and kind of that energy waste, those questions have come up. And I just wanted to let you all know that I did reach out to the sustainability program and attempted to kind of get a little bit more expert advice on it. As I've mentioned before, when I did my own deep dive in fall when I was preparing for council, it's really difficult because there's a lot of studies on this topic, and there's a lot of opposing viewpoints or results and stuff. And so it would really not be very possible for staff to give you a definitive answer on the environmental impacts, and especially when comparing traditional vinyl billboards and what that life cycle analysis would be compared to the digital billboards and that life cycle analysis. If council is wanting that level of definitive input, it ideally would be done with a private consultant, an objective study into that from somebody who has the expertise to really tease apart the differences in opinions and findings in the studies and whatnot. So we did our best to try, and if we had come to a conclusion, we would certainly be providing that with you, but it is a little bit unsatisfying. It's a challenging topic. Similar with the safety question in terms of whether they're distracting to drivers. However, there we do at least have some in-house professional expertise that we can gain some insight from that'll help you. But I just wanted to put that out there, that I realize that it's a little unsatisfying that we keep not being able to tell you exactly, energy costs. We did actually ask the question to see if they could provide us with some information on the energy consumption, and we haven't received a lot of information back, in part because there's a variety around the billboards and the usage, and the size of the display can impact that. And so it's hard to quantify when you don't have a set size and species, so to speak, that you're dealing with, and there's a range of possibilities. So
Thanks, Janessa. That's super helpful. Commissioner Fragola.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I have 7:15, so I would say yes, we have time.
Okay, I didn't know if we had any housekeeping issues for at the end of the meeting. So I am curious, because I think Commissioner Borowski pointed out at our last meeting that in the code, usually if you make changes to something, you need to bring it into compliance. But this new code allows non-conforming signs to be changed without conforming. So I am wondering if we required non-conforming signs to be in compliance, what would be the impact?
So we're not allowing all nonconformities to be carried forward. The concern, I think, was really mostly around the sign face area. So the square footage, the 250 or 300, depending on the street segment, as well as the height. So there were a couple characteristics that, assuming the billboard is already there and you're converting it to digital, that's partly why staff felt comfortable with allowing some of the nonconformities that we knew were real sticking points for the industry, that they really wanted to be able to convert and not lose some of those aspects. However, again, this is something that you can just deliberate on and decide whether you agree with that approach. And I guess one more reminder that the sign code is fairly seasoned in terms of age, and has not had a lot of updating along the way.
Okay.
Oh, Mike, you're muted. I want to hear what you have to say.
I just muted myself when I was already unmuted. So part of the city council discussion with the sponsoring counselor was the idea of focusing on the technology that's now available and simply replacing in kind. But you do bring up a good point, but that's why the major reason the draft is written as it is, with kind of that general direction in council discussion. It does get pretty complicated with all the standards we previously mentioned and those kind of examples. Some signs are have legal non-conforming status in more than one standard. It would limit the number. It would be, it would have to be a case-by-case basis for each sign to see if the code is different than now. It would get a little bit more complicated on where viable conversions could happen.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Mike, it would limit the number of signs that would be viable for converting to digital.
And I guess, yes, in some cases. So for example, if we look at the 1,300 square feet standard in a half a mile, there might be some limits to the available square footage. So maybe there's only 100 square foot available as opposed to the 200 square feet that might be there now, or the 250 square feet. So if those provisions for legal non-conforming situations were modified into our typical situation, once that traditional billboard is removed, then the digital billboard would have to comply with each one of those standards. So I think it would limit viability of some locations altogether, but also it might limit 288 square foot billboard going back down to a 250 square foot billboard. There'd be a whole bunch of different situations because of the number of standards.
Thank you.
Commissioner Taylor, I did not forget about you.
Okay. I still have feedback, so be patient with me. It's like talking to myself twice. So I have a question which you might not be able to answer based on Mike's summary. Of the 20% legal nonconformity, can you guesstimate how many of the signs would remain legal nonconforming in the areas allowed if they were able to go digital? And we won't quote you on it, but it might provide some of the commissioners an idea of the scale that we're talking about.
In doing that analysis, I'm looking at the information we have available. We use previous data that we've collected quite a while ago. We estimated that 20% of the existing 120 billboards that we have would have a legal nonconformity with at least one of the standards. And so we did kind of create that list. And so, you know, maybe 10% have 3 standards they're not in compliance with, and 10% of that 20% of the total. Another half might have 2, and then maybe another third might have just 1 nonconformity. So it varies kind of greatly. It's very site specific. So that's about kind of the best summary I can give, I think. Or was there a more specific question?
No, that's all right. I was just hoping that maybe you could provide a little bit more clarity for commissioners to understand how many billboards we're really talking about that would maintain the existing legal nonconforming status in the transition.
Mike, you're muted. Sorry.
I did it again. Sorry.
It's okay.
Because of the number of standards, then the number of variables is kind of this exponential thing. And so it would be on a case-by-case basis. I feel confident in saying that if every new digital billboard had to comply with all of the standards, that rather than 60 potential sites with our rough estimate, it would significantly decrease. Unfortunately, it would be quite the research project to come up with kind of a rough estimate of how much, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was reduced by a third or so.
Okay, Lauren has her hand up.
Thanks, Commissioner Edwards. I don't want to cut off discussion, but I see that we're getting close to the end of time. And I just want to clarify for those who are watching and or those who wanted to take the opportunity to provide more information to the commission, you know, what's going on with the record. So I will say what I think is going on, and you can confirm that that is accurate. As I understand it, the record is open to anyone. Anyone can submit information to the commission on any topic between now and 5 p.m. on Tuesday, August 18th. And that information will then be included in the packet that goes to the commission for your deliberations on the 24th, so that you have enough time to read and consider the new information that comes in. That will include the memorandum from Public Works, but is not limited to that. And anyone who wants to can submit other information to you. And then I just wanted to give Janessa the opportunity to let folks watching and the public and interested parties know where they can access the Public Works report should they want to read it or respond to it, as well as any other information related to these code changes. So that's what I had to say.
Perfect. Okay. Janessa, why don't you tell us? And then I am going to call on Commission to see if there are items from commissioners before we wrap up.
We do have a land use code amendment page on our planning website, and I've been keeping that up to date. And I can use that as a location where I can put a PDF of the Public Works memo on there. I think it would be helpful to do that tomorrow so that it's available to anybody who has watched tonight, so that they can access it prior to when it goes out in the agenda packet next week. And then I may remove it when I put the agenda packet, because then it will be included in the testimony attachment to that packet. And since it's a little bit of a different approach to add a specific one document out there as testimony, we've been batching the testimony into packets. But I do think that in this case, it would make sense to get it up there and available to people who might have watched tonight and be aware that it exists and want to read it for themselves. So we'll do that. And I agree with everything that Lauren said. If we can get testimony by 5 p.m. next Tuesday, the 18th, we'll include any testimony we receive to the Planning Commission in the agenda packet next week that goes out. And then hopefully you'll have a week to review that material before we deliberate on the 24th.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Janessa. I do have, okay, people are popping up into the queue. Commissioner Borofsky, and then, well, let's see. I know what he has an item from the commission. I'm wondering if Lauren, do you have something to respond to with Janessa? Go ahead.
If I may, just really quickly, I wanted to clarify my comments. Folks who are interested can continue to submit information about these proposed code amendments beyond 5 p.m. next Tuesday. But that information, the Planning Commission won't have a chance to consider that information, because if it comes in after 5, it won't be included in your packet. If it comes in after 5, though, it will be submitted to the City Council, who will have the opportunity to look at all of the information that comes in related to these proposed code amendments. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Commissioner Borofsky.
Well, are we moving on to the next item C on the agenda? So items from staff and items from commission.
I believe we're ready to do that. I don't see any other hands up, so.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to give a little bit of an update on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee. The City Council made a recommendation on the allocation of the construction excise tax before they went on break. I sit on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee that makes the recommendation to the City Council on how to do that. We met several times over the last year and came to a fairly strong consensus as to a path forward on that. We presented that to the council, and the council took a left turn and decided that they wanted to distribute the majority of that money to renter assistant. And that was after they had just had a work session where they were made aware that the county had almost $5 million that they were going to be able to allocate to rent assistance. And a committee that Commissioner Ramey sits on, the CDBG, had also a $480,000 that was available for renters assistance. The council chose to take 2/3 of the $900,000 that was dedicated to help build door fronts with the construction excise tax, and is dedicated to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to go to emergency rent assistance because of COVID. So I just wanted to make the Planning Commission aware of that. It was a little disheartening to put in a lot of that work and then have it decided on and it was a less than 30-minute work session that council had to deliberate on that. So I was pretty disheartened because one of our charges, again, as I brought up, is to try and get more door fronts built for low-income housing here. And one of the tools that we had put in over the last year was the construction excise tax money. And so I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the Planning Commission, and that's what I had.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate that. I have a lot to say about that, but I will hold my comments since it's 7:30. So does anybody, do we have any other items from staff or the commission? Go ahead, Alyssa.
Just real quick. So your next meeting is Monday, the 17th. And at that meeting will be a continuation of your discussion on urban reserves. You're not going to get a new packet. There won't be a presentation. So it'll be a continuation of that discussion. Staff will be there to answer questions and give clarity. Rebecca requested if you had questions right now that your best bet would be to forward those to her so she can be prepared to answer them and maybe even answer some of them in advance. And if you'll recall, our goal of that meeting is to get a recommendation from you all on an option to bring forward to council for them to vote on to bring forward to a public process. Your meeting after that is, of course, Monday the 24th, a continuation of today's conversation. And then your meeting after that was scheduled for September 8th. That meeting's still on the calendar for now, but the item actually got moved to the 15th. You don't need to keep track of that. I am going to get a new schedule sent out to you sometime this week. There's just a little bit of movement with a couple of the items. And then we did add the November 2nd evening meeting. So thank you all. That's all I have.
Sorry, I'm muted. Anybody else? Okay, well, I will leave you all to enjoy your evening. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn our meeting.